and I'm based in Lichfield, which is in the Midlands, right in the middle of England. So wherever you are listening in from, you are very welcome. I've been asked to share some lovely Christmassy stories and some wintry tales with you. So take this as an opportunity for a little rest. Go and grab yourself a cup of tea, or your favourite tipple and some biscuits, or even a slice of Christmas cake, and relax, unwind, and enjoy the stories with me. Have you got your tree up? We've just bought our Christmas tree, and it's downstairs in the living room. It's still in its netting, actually. We haven't hung any decorations on it yet, but it's ready and it's waiting. And it got me thinking about our favourite traditions. And my favourite part of Christmas when I was a little girl was decorating the tree. My dad would go up a rickety old ladder up into the loft, and he would come down victorious with our Christmas tree. It was a little artificial one. It was in the 70s. And it was a white plastic, sparkly, silvery tree. Not a huge tree at all. But it had been in our family for a long time, this tree, and we always looked forward to it coming down from the attic. And once the tree was down and the tree was set up, which required, oh gosh, a bit of an engineering degree, a degree in engineering to put it all together correctly, we'd get the boxes down, and the boxes would have all the decorations in, and there would be decorations that we would see year in, year out. There was none of this changing your theme each year. It was the same decorations, and each time we got them out, they brought back memories from years gone by. And there were even decorations that had been made by myself and my brothers and sisters when we were really small, and we would hang them all on the tree. There'd be sparkling lights, coloured fairy lights they were. And they'd spent the entire summer sitting in the attic, tangling themselves up into knots, so we had to undo them each December. And then came, wow, this was my favourite bit. The tinsel. Do you remember tinsel? Yards and yards of sparkling plastic with that smell that was it was a peculiar smell, tinsel. Did you ever notice it? And we would wind it around and around and around the tree. And it had a lot more to do with enthusiasm than design, our Christmas tree, by the end of it. But we did love it, especially the tinsel. My first story for you is a story from Ukraine, and it's about, well, why there is tinsel on Christmas trees. And if you're comfortable and your ears are waiting, I'd best begin. Many, many years ago, there lived a poor widow woman. She had 3 small children, and they lived in a little cabin on the edge of a village close to the woods. And no matter how hard this woman worked, and she did work very hard, she could never quite make ends meet. She took in washing and she did mending, and her work was very, very good, and she was always busy, but she was never paid very much. And so as the year turned and it got to the season of Christmas time, she was always a little bit sad because she couldn't afford to buy gifts for the children, and they certainly couldn't afford a Christmas tree or decorations to hang on it. And the children were old enough to go to school now, and they'd seen pictures of these magical Christmas trees inside people's houses, and it seemed like another world. But still, they made the best of things. And when it got to Christmas Eve, the widow and her 3 children made their way down into the village, and they went to church, and they sang their hearts out, and she watched her 3 children with pride in their neatly pressed and mended clothes, and she saw them listening to the priest as the priest told everyone that if you wanted help, all you had to do was ask God. And at the end of the service, her children came up to her and begged her for a penny to go and spend on a candle to make a prayer in front of Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin. Well, it was her last penny. She was down to the very bottom of her purse. But she knew that the church would use that money to look after people who were in an even worse position than she was. I've still got my lovely cabin, she thought to herself. I'll have a bed to sleep in tonight, and my children will be warned not everyone is so lucky. And so she gave her youngest son her last penny. And the 3 children skipped off down the aisle to the statue of Our Lady, and they dropped their penny in the box, and they lit a candle, and then the 3 of them prayed with a fervour she'd never seen them pray with before. And then when it was time to go back to their house, the children were so excited they were shushing each other. They wouldn't tell her what they'd prayed for, but off they ran ahead of her down the lane till they got back to their little house. And then it was time to clean for Christmas. Oh, all of them joined in, even the youngest boy, who was only really barely old enough to hold a duster. He did his very best. They swept and they cleaned and they polished, and they made sure everything was spick and span. They might not have a Christmas tree or decorations or even gifts, but they would make sure that little cabin shone like a new pin in time for Christmas Day. All day long they worked, and while the children cleaned and tidied and polished, the woman sat and stitched. She had quite an important job actually. She was mending some linen from one of the rich ladies in the town, and everybody brought their work to her. They knew that she was the best, and she sat and she stitched and stitched and stitched as the sky grew dark and it was almost time for Christmas Eve. She stopped then for a moment and she made some supper for her children before she continued with her work. And as she sat there humming Christmas carols to herself, she looked around the room and she was so proud of what their family had achieved with nothing in their pockets. They'd made a home that was cosy and warm and clean. She was so proud of her children. And then she saw something scuttling across the floor. It was a dirty, great, hairy spider. What on earth was that doing in their house, their clean house? She put down her mending. She went over to the spider and she picked it up carefully and gently. She was a kind woman and she knew it wouldn't do her any harm. And she took it over to the door. And she opened the door just a crack to put the spider outside. Oh, and the icy blast that came in, and a flurry of snowflakes, and she realised that this poor creature, well, it would perish if she put it outside. And so she didn't. She carried it back into the house, and she took it to a dark corner where no one would notice it. And there she set it down on the floor. Now this was quite odd. That spider did not run off. It just looked at her. She could see the candlelight dancing in its 8 eyes as it seemed to listen to her. "Everyone is welcome here at Christmas time," she said to the spider. "Merry Christmas." And then she chuckled to herself and went back to her work. Well, she managed to get the last stitch in just as the knock came on the door. And it was the servants from the rich lady. And they came in and they gave her a small purse of coins. "Our mistress thanks you for your hard work all year," they said. And she smiled to herself. "Wait there," one of them said. And he went outside and he came in with a little Christmas tree in a pot. Oh, she was so excited. "My mistress bids you Merry Christmas," said the servant, and he placed the little Christmas tree down in their room. She couldn't get over it. She knew how delighted the children were going to be. The servants went on their way, and she stood there, hands on hips, and looked at that lovely tree. Well, there were no decorations, obviously, but tomorrow they would go into the woods and they would find holly berries and pine cones, and they would decorate it together, and they would stand and sing carols around it, and she couldn't wait. She made her way up to bed and she slept. All through that long night, all was silent on that most holy of nights. Outside, the snow drifted down softly, but inside, something was happening. The spider crept out from its hiding place and tiptoed across the room to this tree that should be outside that was now inside. He climbed up the pot and up the trunk and then out onto the branches. And then that spider began to spin. And all through the night that spider spun and wove and spun and wove and spun and wove. And the temperature in the room dropped and it became chilly. And still that spider spun and wove until the first rays of dawn woke up the children and the mother. And as they came down the stairs, the children saw their very first Christmas tree. And now came the widow. And she saw something extraordinary had happened. All around that tree were garlanded cobwebs. And they were shining silver, with drops of dew on them that shone like diamonds. And when the children threw open the curtains into that little room, the first rays of the sun touched the cobwebs, and they became silver and gold and gems and jewels. And the widow woman and her 3 children were never hungry again. Isn't that a lovely Christmas story? And that's why, if you go to Eastern Europe or you go to Ukraine, you will find Christmas decorations in the shape of cobwebs. And there is a Christmas spider that is placed in the tree on Christmas Eve by the youngest member of the family. What a wonderful tradition that is. And what a fantastic story to explain the origins of tinsel. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, our tree was completely covered in far too much tinsel and coloured lights and the ornaments that had been with us for years and years. And then it was almost time to go to bed. But what do you do on Christmas Eve before you go to bed? You hang up your stocking. Now, we used to have socks, not these enormous great big stockings that you get in the shop these days that you can never fill. We had socks. It would be a nice sock, maybe a knitted sock, maybe an extra long sock to get extra presents in, but it was a sock. And we would hang our socks up, or we would lie them across the bottom of our beds waiting for Father Christmas to fill them. When I was researching Christmas time traditions for this story set, I found out some really interesting things about what sort of stockings are used around the world. And the interesting thing is, it's not always stockings. Did you know, for example, that in Holland, Father Christmas does not arrive on reindeers? He comes into the harbour on a ship in the middle of the night, and Father Christmas and his friend Black Pete get on a white horse for Father Christmas, or a donkey for Pete, and they travel through the villages and they fill the wooden shoes of the Dutch children. Before they go to bed, they fill up their wooden shoes, or they used to fill up their wooden shoes, with carrots and hay for the donkey and for the horse. And for example, in France, Père Noël comes and puts small gifts into their shoes or slippers in exchange for the carrots that the children leave for Père Noël's donkey. My favourite one though, my favourite one by far is in Puerto Rico, where the children fill shoe boxes with dried grass and they place them underneath their beds, ready for Three Kings Day in January. And when the Three Kings come along, the dried grasses are eaten by the camels and small gifts and things are left in exchange. How wonderful is that? All these lovely traditions spread out across the globe. I'm sure you might even know some new ones that I've never heard of before. Lovely old traditions. Anyway, my stocking was a sock. And when I would wake up on Christmas morning, it would be filled with humble little gifts, like there would be nuts in their shells. Do you remember trying to get the nuts out of shells with a nutcracker when you were little? And there would be all the luxurious chocolate coins in their golden wrappers. And always at the bottom of your sock, there was something really exotic. Can you remember what you used to get at the bottom of your Christmas stocking? I wonder if it was the same as what I got. I would always get an orange, or a satsuma, or a tangerine. Some kind of citrus fruit would be in the bottom of my sock. Where did that come from? I think it was just the idea of having something completely exotic at the bottom of your sock. And it got me thinking, in the middle of winter, when it's cold and snowy and dismal, what do we yearn for? We yearn for the scents and the sights of lovely summery fruits. And that is kind of a Christmas miracle, isn't it? Oranges in the middle of snows. But we have to just wait for the summer to come around. Or do we? because this is the world of story. And my next story is about a girl who finds out just how the seasons work. There was once a girl named Marushka, and she was, well, this is a story, so she was a very beautiful young girl, fair of complexion, golden-haired, blue-eyed. But she was also clever, and more than that, she was kind. And this girl lived with her stepmother and her stepsister, and as delightful as Marushka was, Helena, the stepsister, well, you'd be hard put to find a child that was more sulky and spoilt. And stepmother and stepsister hated Marushka for all her goodness and all her beauty, and they went out of their way always to make her life as miserable as they could. One winter, Marushka's stepmother told her she had a task set before her. "And don't come back if you don't achieve it," she said. "I want you to go and find me some violets." Violets in January. The snow was thick upon the ground. But Marushka didn't argue. She put on her thin shawl, wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, slipped her feet into her wooden clogs, and made her way outside into the snow. And she slipped and slid down the lane into the forest and began to search for violets, those tiny purple flowers that we get in springtime in England. But of course, wherever she looked, she couldn't find them. And she was scrabbling amongst the snow. There was no use. Further and further she got away from the homestead, from the farm, with no luck. And then, as the light began to fade, she heard the howl of wolves. And she realised that this was a task she was not meant to return from. And she began to sob, and the tears froze upon her face as she stumbled through the snow, panicking now. Off in the distance, she saw flames, and she realised there was a fire. Maybe there was someone who could help her. And she made her way under the trees, across the bushes, with her skirt being torn by brambles and her clothes becoming sodden and freezing on that cold afternoon. She found her way to where the fire was. It was a clearing in the middle of the woods, and when she went in, she noticed there were 12 stones in a circle, and in the middle of the circle there was a huge bonfire. Oh, and distraught as she was, the sight of the fire and the smell of the smoke and the crackling of the logs, it cheered her no end. And she looked, and on the stones around the circle were sat men, boys, children, males of all ages, from a small toddler through to men in their prime, through to a very, very ancient man who was sat on the biggest stone. Well, actually, now she looked, it was more of a throne. And he held a staff in one hand, and his hair was white as the snow, and his beard was so long it touched the ground. And she went over to this man and she said, would it be okay if I warmed my hands by your fire? And the old man looked at Marushka in her thin shawl with her face white with the cold and her fingers blue. "Yes," he said, "my child, why are you out here in the January snows? Come and warm yourself by the fire." And she told him. She told him she'd been sent out to find violets, and then she began to cry again. Violets, where am I going to find violets in the January snows? And the old man stood up. And he walked around the circle to a young boy, and he handed the staff to him. "Take over," he said. And the young boy walked back and sat down in the throne. And Marushka watched as something miraculous happened the minute that young boy took the staff and sat in that throne. The snow around them began to melt. And all the leaves on the trees began to unfurl in that golden green that you get in springtime. And there were birds singing. And the grass began to grow where snow had been. And then she saw purple, a wash of violets that moved around the circle and washed up against the trunks of the trees, and violets blossomed everywhere she looked. And her eyes lit up, and she looked at the old man. He said, "There you go. Go and pick as many as you like." And Marushka ran off and she filled her apron with violets, and she came back to the old man. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you." And the old man nodded. And Marushka ran in the direction of home. And when she came into the room, well, her stepmother and her stepsister were quite honestly surprised to see her. And she went over to the table and she tumbled the violets onto the table. She was not pleased, was the stepmother. She picked them up and she flung the flowers into the fire. "Get to bed," she said. "No food, no drink." And off she went. Well, the next day, another task was set. "Strawberries, I want strawberries," said the stepmother, and Marushka once again slipped her cold toes into those wooden clogs, wrapped a thin shawl around her and went out into the snow, but she knew where she was going. And off she went in the direction of the fire, and sure enough she found the old man again, and she asked if she could warm her hands by the fire, and he asked her why she was there, and she told him about the strawberries. "Wait there," said the old man, and he stood and he walked around the circle. And he gave a man in his prime the staff, and he went and sat in that throne, and as before the snow began to melt immediately. The trees burst into leaves, and then something extraordinary happened. One of the trees on the edge of the circle burst into flowers, and as the blossoms fell, she saw down at the base of the trees tiny white flowers opening up. And the white flowers, it was like a sped up film. The white flowers opened and then faded, and where the flowers had been, strawberries began to grow. And they grew plump and juicy, and they blushed red. She laughed with glee at it. "Go fill your apron," said the old man. And off she went. She filled her apron with lovely, thick, fat, juicy strawberries. The scent of them was wonderful. And she thanked the assembled company and she ran home. She tumbled the fruits out onto the table. "Where did you get those?" said the stepmother. And Marushka told her story. And the stepsister and the stepmother crammed their fruits into their mouths so quickly that the juice ran sticky down their chins, and they sent her off to bed again. Well, the following day, another task was set. "Apples, I want some apples," said the stepmother, and off she went. She made her way to the bonfire. She asked permission to warm her hands by the fire, and she told the old man that she had to find apples now. And he walked around the circle. He gave the staff to one of the older men, who came and sat down, and the minute he sat down, the magic began. The leaves came onto the trees, the emerald grass grew where the snow had been, the air filled with the scents and the sounds of late summer, autumn now. And a little tree on the edge of that circle revealed itself to be an apple tree, and the apples grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And Marushka smiled at the old man, and he smiled back. But, he said, today just one. She chose it very carefully. She chose the best apple she could, and she popped it into her apron, and she ran home. And when she got in, she placed the most beautiful apple right in the middle of the table and waited for a stepmother. One lousy apple, said the stepmother. One apple? Never mind this, said Helena. I know what to do. And off she went. The stepsister, she pulled on her thick woolen gloves. She put her feet into her stout winter boots, and she wrapped her thick woolen coat around herself and put on the fur hat and made her way out into the snow. And sure enough, she did manage to find her way to the bonfire. And when she got there and she saw the assembled company sat there, she looked around for somewhere to sit. She looked at the smallest boy there, and she shoved him roughly off the stone and sat in his place. Shh, she said as the boy began to cry. She took her mittens and warmed them by the fire. I want an apple, she said to the old man. Do you now? Said the old man. And he looked at her then from top to toe, and he took in her warm fur hat and the thick fur coat and the gloves and the boots. And then he just... and they were gone. Where there had been light, there was darkness. The day drew on. It was dark now, with no fire there. The men were gone, and the thrones, well, they were just stones now. And Helena found herself lost. In the woods, in the snow, at the end of the day. Back at the farmhouse, stepmother paced up and down, wondering where her daughter Helena had gone. And eventually she picked up her own coat and made her way out into the snow to find her daughter. And I like to think that as that nasty woman was making her way through the snow, that somewhere off, not too far away, she might have heard the sound of wolves howling. So there you go. Always be kind to the old men and old women you meet in stories. So we have our stockings stuffed. We've opened our presents. And what happened next at your house on Christmas Day? Well, in my house, when I was a young girl, it was all hands on deck to get the food ready. And there would be all sorts of wonderful things. And we always had a turkey that was twice the size it needed to be, that we would have to eat for at least 2 weeks after Christmas. I'm sure we all did that, didn't we? Turkey sandwiches for days and days afterwards. But oh, what a feast it was. There would be crackers. We'd have the hats on, the paper hats on. We might listen to the Queen's speech, or we might watch Morecambe and Wise Christmas special. Oh, Christmas telly in the old days. You couldn't beat it, could you? But we would get to the point where we were all so stuffed with food and all so relaxed in front of the telly that we'd start nodding off. And I suppose we should really count our blessings, shouldn't we? To be so full of food, to be so surrounded by friends and family, and to be warm and cosy at the coldest time of the year. Because, do you know, not everybody's quite that lucky, are they? There are lots of people less fortunate than us. And my last story for you is about just such a man. It was a tramp. A man out in the snow in Russia many, many years ago. He had a long white hair, he had a long white beard and magnificent white moustaches, and he wore a ragged red coat, and he had his hood pulled up, fur-lined of course. But you could tell how long he'd been on the roads, because if you looked at his boots, you would notice that one of them, well, the top part was starting to come away from the bottom part. And as he walked along through this freezing landscape, the snow began to sneak in between his toes. And it was bitterly cold. Even for Russia, it was bitterly cold. And his eyes were narrowed against the blizzard that was swirling around him. And then they opened wide and twinkled with joy as off in the distance he saw lights. And he knew there was a hotel nearby. And he hurried off towards the hotel through the blizzard. Now, let's go to the hotel. The hotel was one of the best hotels in the area, well known especially for the food that the hotel owner provided. He was famed for his hospitality. He was a good man. And normally at this time of the year, his hotel would be full to bursting. It was almost Christmas time, and he would be full. But there was such an iron winter that it was ferocious, and no travellers were travelling anywhere. And even though every room in his hotel was prepared for guests, and there was a big pot of beetroot soup, of borscht, bubbling away on the stove, waiting for guests, nobody could get through. Nobody would go out travelling in this weather. And so we see this hotel owner, this good man, sat by the fire as the clock ticks down to midnight. And he's staring forlornly into the fire, wondering what he's going to do. He's just about to go up to bed, and he hears a knock on the door. He gets up and goes over to the door, and he opens the door, and there is our tramp, with his coat in tatters, his shoes fall into pieces, and he looks half frozen, and he looks up at the hotel owner, and he says, "Have you got a bed for the night and a bite to eat? Please." And the hotel owner gives him a good look in it. He says, I can fit you in, but it'll cost you 3 rubles. Says the tramp, and he turns to walk away. And the hotel owner watches him walking away and realises that you can't leave him outside on a night like this. And he's a kind man. "Hang on," he shouts to him. "Come on in, friend. Come and get warm by the fire." And he leads this old tramp into his beautiful hotel and settles him down in the table that's closest to the fire. And the old man's stomach begins to rumble so loudly that he can hear it. "Would you like some soup?" he says. "I would," said the old man, "but I can't afford to pay you. Look, if you let me stay here and give me some food, I promise you I will pay you the 3 rubles as soon as I can." "Don't worry about it," says the hotel owner. And soon he's back with a big bowl of steaming borscht, which he places in front of the old man, and he watches him happily. Actually, it gives him pleasure to watch this old man eat, because it's clear he's not eaten for a long time. And he brings him some fresh bread, and the man finishes off this bowl of beetroot soup, and he's so busy eating that this beautiful magnificent white moustache of his ends up stained pink from the beetroot. And the man laughs to himself and just smiles as he watches this old fella eating as if he's never eaten before. "Do you want some more?" he says. And he fills the bowl again. And when the tramp has eaten his fill, the hotel manager leads him off to a bedroom, and he gives him a good room, and he gives him warm blankets, and he makes sure there's a cosy fire in there. "I will pay you back," says the tramp. "I've not forgotten 3 coins. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." "Don't worry about it," says the hotel owner, and off he goes to bed. Well, the next morning, the tramp has disappeared. There's not a trace of him anywhere. "Yeah, I don't think I'll be seeing those 3 roubles," says the owner. "Never mind. What's a bit of money against a bit of kindness, eh?" Anyway, would you believe it, that very day, all the snows begin to melt, and the roads are opened again, and that night his hotel is filled with the ringing of laughter and good times, and his pockets are filled with the jingling of cash. A few days later, when he's done a roaring trade over the season, the hotelier decides he's going to go to the cathedral in Moscow. He's going to give prayers, give thanks for his newfound prosperity. And so off he goes, and he walks through the cold day until he gets to Moscow, and he goes to the cathedral. Can you imagine this huge, great cathedral, this grand building? The bells are ringing. He walks inside. He can smell the incense. The candles are burning. And as he walks into the cathedral, he can see all of the painted icons. Beautiful paintings, all decorated with real gold leaf. And they're all twinkling and winking in the candlelight. And it's just a wonderful place. And he looks at the paintings as he's walking towards the altar. And then he stops. Because one of the paintings looks very familiar. And he walks over to it, and he has a good look at it, and he's trying to work out why it looks familiar. And it's a painting of an old man in a red coat with white hair, magnificent white moustaches and a big white beard, and twinkling blue eyes. And when he looks a bit closer, he spots something very odd. The moustache of the saint has got a red stain from beetroot across it. It's got a pink moustache. Well, this is odd, he thinks. And he recognises the old tramp that he's been kind to earlier that week. Well, this is the place to say a prayer in front of, obviously. And so he pays his penny, he gets his candle, and he goes to push it into the soft sand in the little shallow tray underneath the icon where you put your candles. And as he's trying to put the candle in, he realises he can't get it in. Something's stopping it. And he brushes the sand out of the way. And there he finds 3 coins. The payment has been made in full. And he looks up at this painting, and he could swear the painting winks at him. he looks down at the bottom of the frame, and there are two words, the names of the saint, and he looks at the name Saint Nicholas, Santa Niklaus, or as we call him in England, Santa Claus. That's a wonderful old story from Russia, that one. So that brings us to the end of our time together. I really hope you've enjoyed listening to these stories as much as I've enjoyed sharing them with you. So my name is Maria Credali. If you've enjoyed the stories and you would like to support me and support my work, please do follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook as Maria Credali Storyteller. I'm on Instagram as Maria Storyteller, or you can join my mailing list and you'll find out whenever I'm doing performances and shows online and in person as well, and that's on my website mariacredali.co.uk. But I hope you've had a lovely rest during this busy season, and I hope to see you again soon. And it just remains for me to wish you a very Merry Christmas.